Okay, this is how you use the quadratic formula as a process to solve for the values of x in a quadratic equation. Now, to be able to use the quadratic formula, and here is that quadratic formula. Videos also included here. Now, you're going to find the values of x using a, b, and c, but a, b, and c come from the equation, but the equation has to be in standard form. Standard form of a quadratic equation is that ax squared plus bx plus c set equal to 0. So if we don't have it set up like that, we need to change the equation so that it is. So I need to subtract 3x on this side. And if I need it to be in my ax squared plus bx plus c, that minus 3x needs to go in the middle here, now equal to 0. Now I know that my a equals 2, my b equals -3, and my c equals -5. Once you have all of those values, now you can plug it into the quadratic equation. So x is going to equal negative b. Now, b is -3, so negative b is actually +3 in this case. So it's the opposite of b, basically, and the opposite of -3 is +3. Plus or minus the square root of b squared, well, that's -3 squared, minus 4, AC means times A times C, all over 2 times A. Now let's simplify parts that we can. So the 3 is fine, plus or minus. Now, -3 squared is 9. And if I look at that minus 4 AC, that actually means to me -4 times 2 times -5, which actually gives me 40, positive 40. -4 times 2 is -8 times -5. That's where I got my positive 40 divided by 4. Now, this is going to be the square root of 49 inside there. Well, we know the square root of 49 is 7. So my answer is going to be 3 plus 7 divided by 4 and 3 minus 7 divided by 4. That's going to be your biggest error. You actually have to solve this first, then you can divide. So we actually need to do 7 plus 3 divided by 4, and I'm sorry, 3 plus 7 divided by 4, and then 3 minus 7 divided by 4. These are going to be our two values of x. Well, that's 10/4, which is 5 halves, or 2.5. And this is -4 divided by 4, so -1. Here are my two values of x. Those are the two values that solve this equation, that original one that we were working on. You can actually prove it. You can actually prove it in the equation. So we had, 2x squared minus 5 equals 3x, right? 2x squared minus 5 equals 3x. If you plug in these values, it actually works. I'll show you with -1 because it's probably the easiest. 2 times -1 squared is 1. Minus 5 gives me -3. Well, 3 times -1 gives me -3. -1 actually works in this equation. And if I do 2x squared minus 5 equals 3x again, but now I plug in 2.5. Well, 2.5 squared is 6.25. Yep, 6.25. And times 2 is 12.5. Minus 5 gives me 7.5. Guess what 3, sorry, I should fill that in. 3 times 2.5 is 7.5. We actually get the two values of the variable that make this equation true. Now the quadratic formula, again, it works every time. It just is long and has a lot of possibilities for you to make errors. So let's try that again. Take a look at your equation. It's got to be in standard form. So I need this to be 2x squared plus x and then minus 3 set equal to 0. I know my a, my b is technically 1, and my c is -3. So x equals negative b, which is -1, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is actually going to be 1, minus 4 times 2 times -3, all over 2 times a, which is 4. Now, yes, there are some parts of this that you can simplify as you're plugging it in. I would not mess with this minus 4 AC because this is where things get messy. So plus or minus Well, remember that negative belongs to the 4. So negative 4 times 2 is negative 8, times 3 is positive 24, plus 1 is 25, and we know the square root of 25 is 5. That means my answers are going to be negative 1 plus 5, which is 4 over 4, and negative 1 minus 5. So my two answers are 1 and negative 1.5. Those are my values for x. X would equal 1 and negative 1.5. Let me show you what happens when things aren't so pretty. Okay, when things aren't so pretty. Now, this is your vertical motion model problem. And now that I think about it, I don't want to do this one. Let's do this one. Sorry. I know I'm switching on you. Well, first let's get it in the standard form. 3x squared. I'm going to put the minus x here in the middle because that's my b. And then minus 1 equals 0. So a is 3, b is negative 1, and c is negative 1. Again, those are things that you can recognize just by looking at it, but there you go. So if I'm going to find the values of x, I need negative b, which is positive 1 in this case, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 1, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a, which is 3. So this is 1 plus or minus, and I know 6 is my denominator. Now let's look at the other stuff. I have negative 4 times 3, which is negative 12, plus 1, or times negative 1 is positive 12, right? All of that's positive 12, plus 1 is 13. I need the square root of 13. I know that's not going to be pretty. So this is actually going to be 1 plus or minus. If you square root 13, I'm using a calculator right now, and so should you, you get something about 3.6. But it's got a lot of blah, blah, blahs behind it. Now, I'm not going to clear my calculator, but I'm going to do 1 plus that 3.6 blah, blah in my calculator, and 1 minus, the 3.6 in my calculator. And then divided by 6 in my calculator. Now, that number is still in my calculator. I'm going to add 1 to it. I have 4.6 blah, 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 and divide that by 6. And I get an answer of 0.767, which I'm going to round to 77. Now, to go back and get that number back in my calculator, do you remember we got it by square rooting 13? Just type in the square root of 13 again, and now I have it. And now I can do negative that, and I'm going to add 1. I get negative 2.6 blah, blah, blah. Divide that by 6, and I have negative 0.43. These are my two values for x. X would equal 0.77 and 0.43. If you are going to round, be smart about your rounding, and I wouldn't round until you got your very, very, very last number. Like you are right at your answer. I know that this had blah, blah, blahs behind it, but I actually used those values in my calculator. Sometimes if you round too harshly, your numbers could be off quite a bit. So I would stick to it. But hopefully that helped clear up any questions on how to use the quadratic formula. Have fun.